Breaking news. If you or someone you love receives SSI or SSDI benefits, the next 60 seconds could change everything you thought you knew about your payments. President Trump just put pen to paper on a game-changing executive order that's sending shockwaves through the Social Security disability community. We're talking about modifications that could impact millions of Americans who depend on these critical benefits every single month. Here's what's happening right now. This isn't speculation or rumor. This is official policy that's already in motion. Whether you're currently receiving benefits, waiting for approval, or helping a family member navigate the system, you need to understand what's changing and how it affects your financial future. In this video, I'm breaking down everything you need to know in plain English. No confusing government jargon, no fluff, just the facts that matter to you. We'll cover who's impacted, what's changing with payment amounts, new eligibility requirements, and the exact timeline when these changes take effect. But here's the critical part. Not everyone is hearing about this yet, and those who act on this information first will be in the best position to protect their benefits and maximize what they're entitled to receive. If this information helps you or someone you care about, smash that like button right now. It helps us reach more people who desperately need to see this. Let's dive in. All right, so let's get straight into what's actually happening here because there's a lot of confusion swirling around online, and I want to make sure you have the real facts. President Trump has indeed signed a new executive order, and while the details are still being analyzed by experts across the country, what we know so far is that this order is focused on streamlining and reforming various aspects of federal benefit programs, including Social Security disability insurance and supplemental security income. Now, before anyone panics or gets overly excited, let me walk you through this step by step, because understanding the nuances here is absolutely crucial to knowing how this might affect you or your loved ones. First things first, we need to understand what SSI and SSDI actually are, because even though millions of Americans receive these benefits, there's still a ton of confusion about the difference between the two programs. Social Security disability insurance, or SSDI, is a benefit that you've essentially earned through your work history. When you work and pay Social Security taxes, you're building up credits toward disability coverage. If you become disabled and can no longer work, SSDI provides monthly payments based on your lifetime earnings. It's insurance that you've paid into, which is an important distinction. On the other hand, Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is a needs-based program for people with limited income and resources who are disabled, blind, or aged 65 or older. You don't need a work history to qualify for SSI, but you do need to meet strict financial eligibility requirements. Many people actually receive both programs simultaneously if they qualify for SSDI, but their benefit amount is low enough that they also meet the income limits for SSI. Now, here's where things get interesting with this new executive order. From what we're seeing in the preliminary documentation, the order appears to be focused on several key areas that could have widespread implications. One of the major components involves reassessing how disability determinations are made and potentially expediting the review process for both initial applications and ongoing eligibility reviews. This is actually a double-edged sword that we need to talk about honestly. On one hand, speeding up the application process could be incredible news for the hundreds of thousands of people currently waiting months or even years to get their disability claims approved. The current system is notoriously slow, and many people who are genuinely disabled and unable to work are left in financial limbo while their cases wind through the bureaucratic maze. If this executive order results in faster processing times and quicker access to benefits for those who truly need them, that would be a massive win for vulnerable Americans across the country. However, and this is a big however, there's also language in the order about increasing fraud prevention measures and conducting more thorough continuing disability reviews. This is where people are starting to get nervous, and rightfully so. Continuing disability reviews, or CDRs as they're called in the Social Security world, are periodic evaluations that the Social Security Administration conducts to determine whether someone is still disabled according to their standards. If your condition has improved to the point where you can work again, your benefits can be terminated. Now, these reviews have always been part of the program. But if the frequency or intensity of these reviews increases significantly, it could mean more stress and uncertainty for current beneficiaries who might worry about losing their benefits even if their condition hasn't actually improved. Let's talk about the fraud prevention aspect for a moment, because this is something that always comes up in discussions about reforming disability programs. Yes, fraud exists in every government program, and yes, we should absolutely have systems in place to prevent people from gaming the system. Nobody wants their tax dollars going to people who are perfectly capable of working but are pretending to be disabled. That's not fair to the people who genuinely need help, and it's not fair to the taxpayers funding these programs. However, and this is crucial, we also need to be incredibly careful that legitimate beneficiaries aren't caught up in overly aggressive fraud prevention measures. The reality is that many disabilities are invisible. Someone might look perfectly healthy on the outside, but be dealing with chronic pain, mental health conditions, or other issues that genuinely prevent them from maintaining employment. The concern among advocacy groups is that ramped-up fraud prevention could lead to legitimate cases being flagged and benefits being wrongfully terminated, forcing people into lengthy and stressful appeals processes. Another component of this executive order that's generating discussion involves potential changes to how income and resources are calculated for SSI eligibility. This is actually really important because the current SSI program has resource limits that haven't been updated in decades. Right now, an individual can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources, and a couple can't have more than $3,000. These limits were set back in 1989 and haven't been adjusted for inflation, which means they're increasingly restrictive and don't reflect modern economic realities. Some analysts are suggesting that this executive order might include provisions to modernize these limits, which would be fantastic news for SSI recipients who are currently living in poverty because they're afraid to save any money or accumulate any assets for fear of losing their benefits. Can you imagine being disabled, unable to work, and having to live your entire life with less than $2,000 to your name? It's an incredibly difficult situation that traps people in poverty. There's also discussion about potential changes to how the Social Security Administration determines what constitutes a disability in the first place. The current system uses something called the Listing of Impairments, which is essentially a medical guide that describes various conditions and the criteria needed to qualify as disabled. These listings are supposed to be updated regularly to reflect advances in medical knowledge and treatment, but in reality, many of them are outdated and don't accurately reflect how certain conditions impact people's ability to work in today's economy. If this executive order includes provisions to modernize these medical listings, it could actually help more people qualify for benefits, particularly those with newer or less understood conditions like long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, or certain mental health disorders that have historically been difficult to get approved. Now, let's address the elephant in the room that everyone's worried about. Are benefits going to be cut? This is the question I'm seeing in comments sections everywhere, and I understand why people are anxious. Your disability benefits might be the only thing standing between you and homelessness, so any talk of changes to the system is naturally terrifying. Based on what we're seeing so far, this executive order doesn't appear to include across-the-board benefit cuts. However, individual circumstances could definitely change depending on how these new policies are implemented. If continuing disability reviews become more frequent or more stringent, some people might find their benefits discontinued if the Social Security Administration determines their condition has improved. If fraud prevention measures become more aggressive, some people might face additional scrutiny and documentation requirements. These aren't necessarily bad things if they're implemented fairly and appropriately, but they do represent potential risks that current beneficiaries should be aware of. One aspect that hasn't gotten as much attention, but is actually really important, is the potential impact on the application and appeals process. Right now, getting approved for disability benefits is notoriously difficult. The initial approval rate for SSDI claims is only around 30 to 40%, which means the majority of applicants are initially denied and have to go through the appeals process. This can take years, and many people end up needing to hire lawyers to help them navigate the system. If this executive order includes reforms that make the application process more transparent and user-friendly, that could be incredibly beneficial. Imagine if the Social Security Administration provided clearer guidance on what documentation is needed, or if they implemented better technology to track your claim status, or if they hired more administrative law judges to reduce the massive backlog of cases waiting for hearings. These kinds of improvements wouldn't grab headlines, but they could make an enormous difference in people's lives. We also need to talk about the timeline here because that's something everyone wants to know. Executive orders don't necessarily take effect immediately. Many of the provisions in this order will require the Social Security Administration to develop new regulations, update their systems, and train their staff on new procedures. This could take months or even years to fully implement. Some changes might start rolling out within weeks, while others might not be seen until next year. The Social Security Administration will likely publish proposed regulations and allow for a public comment period, which means disability advocates and beneficiaries will have opportunities to provide input on how these changes are implemented. I'd encourage everyone watching to stay informed and participate in those comment periods if you have concerns or suggestions. What should you be doing right now in response to this executive order? First, and most importantly, don't panic. If you're currently receiving benefits, they're not disappearing overnight. Continue following all the normal rules and requirements for your benefits. Report any changes in your income or living situation as required. Respond promptly to any correspondence from the Social Security Administration. Keep all your medical documentation organized and up to date. If you have ongoing treatment for your disability, make sure you're attending appointments and following your doctor's recommendations, because that documentation is crucial if you ever face a continuing disability review. If you're in the application process right now, keep pushing forward. Don't let uncertainty about policy changes discourage you from pursuing benefits you might be entitled to receive. Second, stay informed through reliable sources. There's a lot of misinformation spreading on social media, and it's easy to get confused or scared by sensationalized headlines. The Social Security Administration's official website is your best source for accurate information about policy changes. Disability advocacy organizations like the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives and the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities are also excellent resources that provide analysis of policy changes from the perspective of beneficiaries and applicants. Consider subscribing to their newsletters or following them on social media so you get accurate updates. Third, if you're worried about how these changes might affect you personally, consider consulting with a disability attorney or advocate. Many offer free consultations where they can review your specific situation and provide guidance. This is especially important if you receive a notice about a continuing disability review or if your benefits are threatened in any way. Having professional representation can make an enormous difference in protecting your rights and ensuring you receive the benefits you're entitled to. The bigger picture here is that disability programs are always going to be subject to political debates and policy changes, regardless of who's in office. These programs serve millions of Americans and cost billions of dollars, so they're naturally going to be scrutinized and reformed over time. What matters most is that changes are made thoughtfully, with input from the people they affect most, and that they ultimately serve the goal of providing a safety net for Americans who genuinely cannot work due to disability, while also being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. That balance is difficult to achieve, and reasonable people can disagree about the best way forward. Stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, take care of yourself and your loved ones during this time of uncertainty.